In the house where the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the silence of someone who had never been seen, she waited. Always inside, between pots and pans and smiles that received no response, she heard footsteps in the hallway and recognized his even before the door opened. He would stop at the entrance to the kitchen, say, "See you later," with his eyes averted, and return to the world where she was just a shadow, a nameless employee when the family arrived. Never a touch, never a full look, only open windows in the early hours of the morning, where he was someone who spoke softly and apologized with his eyes. But later never came, and the note she left that morning was read too late. He found the folded paper in the dishcloth, as if it were just another common detail of everyday life. But all it took was one sentence written in shaky letters to make time stand still. "I'm tired of being a secret. Goodbye." At that moment, the house became different. The smell of coffee seemed more bitter, and her absence took shape in the corners. No one in the family noticed, no one asked. But he knew. He knew he had crossed an invisible line, the one that separates convenient silence from irreversible cowardice. And that was when the most discreet and cruel punishment of all began, the constant memory of a woman who loved him in silence, and whom he let go in silence. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. She arrived early that day, as always, her feet light on the cold kitchen floor, her hair tied in a hasty bun, her clean apron covering her simple dress. The sun hadn't yet touched the mansion's windows, but she had already put the coffee on the stove, lined up the plates on the marble countertop, and organized the cutlery as if every detail mattered. And it did, at least to her. Because in that space where no one remembered her full name, she found meaning in small gestures, in the silent care, in the smells that preceded his steps, in the coffee he preferred more bitter. She knew this without him saying it. He never said much. He never stayed long enough. He would just pass by the kitchen door, glance quickly as if he shouldn't look, and say, "See you later." He never went any further. He never crossed the line between desire and guilt. But on days when the house was quiet, when his family went out to events or when his father was traveling, he would appear at the kitchen window as if asking permission to exist there. And it was in those moments, between the steam from the kettle and the eyes that avoided touch, that the two talked about everything, except what they felt. She knew she couldn't wait much longer, that he had a surname that carried weight, a future that was set out for him, a place in the world that didn't accommodate a woman like her. But even so, every day she made the coffee a little stronger, folded the napkin in a special way, put extra sugar in his cup just because once in a low voice he said that life was too bitter. That stayed with her. Like everything stayed with her. Like the way he fidgeted with his watch when he was nervous. Like the way he looked at her when no one was looking, with eyes that he wanted, but couldn't want. When his mother came down for breakfast, he would walk away. He became someone else, an heir, an exemplary son, a cold man. And she? She was still there, invisible. She kept serving, smiling, swallowing words that hurt her throat, until one day the words no longer fit. That morning the smell of coffee seemed different, stronger, like something was burning. But it wasn't the coffee, it was her. It was the end of a cycle she didn't want to repeat. He walked through the kitchen door, as always. He said the same, "See you later," with the same absent tone. Only this time, she didn't answer, or smile. She just looked into his eyes for too long. Long enough for him to know, and he knew, but he pretended not to see. He pretended like he always pretended. And that was the last time. Because that morning, she left a folded note on the dishcloth. She grabbed her bag, walked through the back door and didn't look back. Not once. Not for him. Not for anything. Her silence was the last thing that remained in that kitchen. And it was the first thing he felt when he came back and couldn't find her anymore. He climbed the stairs slowly that day, as if the house had become heavier, as if the silence announced something he couldn't name but already feared. His mother's laughter came from the living room, The servants walked around, and everything seemed to be going on normally. But there in the kitchen, there was an absence that screamed in silence. The dishcloth was still on the counter, but the kettle wasn't whistling. The smell of coffee, which always came before he arrived, was gone. There was no prepared cup. No sugar, no details that only she would add. And it was in that empty space that he saw the note. Simple, folded, as if it were part of the dishes. He recognized her handwriting before he even opened it. And when he read it, his eyes couldn't pretend. I'm tired of being a secret. Goodbye. No signature, no promise, just a clean, mature, final goodbye. And that's when everything stopped, as if time had been ripped from that house along with her. That same morning, he looked for her as if he were waking up from a trance. He went downstairs without warning. He went out the front door, got in his car, and drove to the neighborhood where he knew she lived. But he found the house empty. A neighbor said she left with a small suitcase and sunken eyes. He said she smiled before getting on the bus, a short but firm smile, without hesitation, without longing, like someone who had already cried everything inside before making the decision. He came back empty-handed, with his breathing uneven, and with the certainty that he had lost something he had never had the courage to hold on to. And the following days were all the same, full of glances that searched without knowing where, of gestures that repeated a routine that no longer made sense. He continued eating, working, living, but always missing a piece. Months passed. The kitchen smelled of coffee again, but it wasn't the same. No other employee could get the coffee right the way she did. No one folded the napkin. In that subtle, almost loving way. His mother never noticed his absence. She never asked. She thought it was just another employee change, like so many others. But he knew. He knew that the woman who served tea with her eyes lowered was irreplaceable, and that he never at any time had the courage to love her outside of the dark. He missed her, in the touch of the cutlery, in the mornings that were cold even when the sun was shining. He started avoiding the kitchen, passing by, having coffee, outside the house, because everything there reminded him, everything screamed her name without saying a word. Time passed mercilessly, and with it came attempts to forget. Lukewarm relationships, forced smiles, family lunches, but nothing fulfilled him. No woman seemed to know that he liked to fiddle with his watch when he was restless. No one noticed his vacant gaze on Sunday mornings. And it was like that, between days that repeated themselves and nights when the memory returned without being called, that he began to understand what he had done, or rather, what he had failed to do. It was not her absence that destroyed everything. It was his omission, the fear, the cowardice of loving only when no one was watching. And this punishment was subtle but constant, an echo that accompanied him silently, like the sound of a cup that was never served the same way again. One day he tried to write a letter. It was raining outside, and the sound of water on the glass took him back to the nights when she would gently close the windows, asking him not to catch a cold. He grabbed a pen and paper and sat down at the table, but he only wrote her name and cried over her shaky handwriting. The paper was stained, crumpled, forgotten in the back of a drawer. It was like everything he had in relation to her, a beginning that he never had the courage to continue. He looked in the mirror and saw a man who was whole on the outside, but shattered on the inside. He wore a suit, smiled in meetings, gave interviews, and no one realized that his soul was still in the kitchen of a house where he pretended not to love the one who loved him. Every birthday, he remembered the first time she smiled when he offered her flowers on the sly. They were simple, bought at the market, but she cried. He didn't understand at the time. Now he understood, because that was all she had, all he gave, a hidden gesture that tried to be love, but was just a crumb. Years later, the house remained untouched. His mother grew older, his father fell ill, his brothers started families. But him? He remained there, trapped, not by obligation, but by memory, by guilt. One day, during renovations, he found a small cardboard box inside the pantry cupboard. Inside were some of her belongings, a scarf, a beaded bracelet, a notebook with recipes. And inside the notebook, carefully folded, was an old photo. He and she back to back, by the lake on the property. She was laughing. He was holding her by the waist. She didn't remember that photo existed. She didn't even know who took it. But it was real, the only tangible proof of a love too hidden to survive. He kept the photo inside a book, a novel, as if he wanted her to be part of a different, better story, where he had been brave. Sometimes he dreamed about her, and in the dreams she wore the same blue dress she wore on Sundays, and looked at him without resentment, only with silence, a silence that weighed more than any scream. He tried to find her. Once, he hired a detective. The man came back a few days later with vague information. She lived far away with another life, another name, another world. She had a small business. She lived alone. She was fine. And he knew then that he no longer had the right to ask, much less to show up, because she didn't want to be remembered by the one who hid her. She wanted to be remembered by the one who respected her in the light of day. Since then, he never tried to contact her again. He only kept the photo, the note, and the memory. He continued living among gala dinners and empty tables. Her name was never said again in that house, but inside him it never stopped echoing, and even without seeing her, even without saying a word, she accompanied him. In the emptiness of the mornings, in the silence of the nights, in the coffee that never tasted like home again, it was as if destiny had written everything in fine pen, but he had smudged it out of fear. And now, only the erased traces of what could have been remained. She began to change with the rhythm of the glances he couldn't hide. She noticed when he lingered at the kitchen door, when he touched the doorframe with his fingers before saying, "Hi." He would stop, hesitate, as if he wanted to stay but forced himself to go. And she, with her heart racing, began to understand that this was love, even if hidden, even if denied. She began to take more care of her hair, to put on a soft perfume on the mornings when she knew he would be around, to arrange the flowers in the kitchen with the colors he praised. She waited for his footsteps in the hallway like someone waiting for a familiar song to play, and when he appeared, even if he said little, even if he didn't play, his eyes said something. They said something and then fell silent. Always. She didn't demand promises. She never asked him to talk about the future. But inside her, hope grew. Not because he promised, but because there was truth in his gestures. When she was sick, he discreetly left medicine on the table. When she forgot to eat, he left cut fruit and pretended it wasn't him. When she cried one night in the pantry, he stood silently on the other side of the door, not daring to come in, but unable to leave. Was it love? It was. But a shy, disguised, and above all, embarrassed love. And that hurt her more than any absence. At the family breakfasts, she served bread with her loving hands. She listened to his mother talk about potential brides. She saw the photos of the girls who belonged to the same world as him, and even there, invisible, she felt her heart ache, because she knew she would never be introduced to that table. She didn't fit in that porcelain portrait, in that cold environment with polite voices. She was warmth, she was soul, but that wasn't enough to be accepted. And every time he looked away when his mother entered the room, it was like a stab in the back, as if to say, "I see you," but only when no one else does. She began to understand that she was adapting to a space that rejected her, that she was giving herself entirely to someone who only received her in fragments. Loneliness grew in the midst of his presence. A cruel paradox. He was close, and yet she felt alone. Because love, when it is not acknowledged, begins to hurt like absence. And she began to bleed inside. Silent, proud, but hurt. Very hurt. Still, she continued. Maybe out of fear of going, maybe because she still believed that one day he would choose her with courage, that he would appear at the kitchen door not just to say "see you later," but to finally say "stay." Until that day she waited, like someone who still has faith. But the faith of someone who loves alone has an expiration date, and she was already feeling the first signs that hers was running out. He grew up with promises he never chose. Since he was a child, he heard that he would have to be the next to carry on the family name, to continue the empire built with sacrifices and alliances. His father would repeat that weakness was a luxury that the men of the house could not have. His mother made a point of reminding him that everything, including love, had to come with a surname and pedigree, and so he learned to divide his heart into compartments, one for duty, another for the feelings that could not be said out loud. Deep down, he knew she was different. He knew that none of the girls he had met at galas made him laugh like she did. None of them listened to his silences like she did or made his coffee exactly the way he liked it. She didn't wear designer dresses, but she had a way of tucking her hair behind her ear that made him lose his cool. And yet, he chose silence. Every time his parents brought up the subject of marriage, he swallowed hard. They said they had met an ambassador's daughter, a promising young woman from the elite. They showed him photos, rehearsed smiles, certain destinations, and he just nodded. Inside him, a constant battle on. One side, the desire to open that kitchen door and call her name loud and clear. On the other, fear of disappointing, of being cut off from the inheritance, of becoming the man who tarnished the family's prestige by falling in love with someone who was seen as an employee. What he felt for her was real, and that's why it scared him, because in his world, reality had no place. His world was made of appearances, of long dinners, scheduled smiles, promises that didn't come from the heart. Every time his mother came downstairs and found him in the kitchen, he would move away. He avoided her eyes. And even when he saw the hurt expression she tried to hide, he said nothing. She waited for a gesture, a word, anything, and he would back away. Always. At night, when no one else was around, he would try to justify himself. He would whisper apologies, promise futures. But even though she said she understood, she was increasingly distant. He could feel it. He felt that he was losing her a little each time he chose the comfort of cowardice. But he couldn't do anything different. The pressure from his family was like a thick fog. It was everywhere. In the walls of the house, in the sound of the cutlery, in his father's gaze. Even when he wanted to run away, he stayed. He stayed because it was easier, because it was safer. And that choice, made 1,000 times in silence, began to steal something from him. He began to turn love into guilt, desire into anticipated regret. And everything that had once been sweet now tasted wrong. He wanted her, but he didn't want to pay the price. And she was starting to understand. She was starting to see that his love was real, but it wasn't strong. And that was slowly killing them both. She began to wake up differently. It was no longer his footsteps that awakened any kind of joy in her, nor the sound of his voice whispering from afar, as it did on nights when the world slept and they could, for a few seconds, be whoever they wanted. She woke up like someone waking up after a battle that has already been lost. The coffee was still being made, the plates were lined up, but her soul was no longer there. Not completely. Her hands were still precise, her gestures delicate. But her eyes no longer shone. He noticed. It was impossible not to notice. The woman who had previously awaited his arrival with subtlety now barely looked at him. She answered what was necessary, smiled with her lips, but not with her heart. And that disconcerted him. He tried to get closer, to say something that would make her return to that old version, the woman who believed, even without promises. But she was no longer that way. She was tired, not of love, but of almost love, of almost touch, of almost public gesture, of almost commitment. It was as if she had emptied everything she felt into small gestures until there was nothing left. She stopped arranging flowers on the counter. She no longer folded the napkins like she used to. His favorite recipes disappeared from the menu, and when he asked, she would just say, "I didn't have time today." But it was a lie. She had time. What she lacked was the will to nurture a love that only existed behind the scenes of the house. the will to continue offering her heart to a man who never had the courage to extend it back to her in the light of day. He began to dream of her touch. Her absence became a ghost. It was in every corner of the house, in the way the chairs seemed colder, in the cup he now made himself, in the lack of the smell of cake in the morning, and most of all, in the absence of the look that had once made him feel human, because that was what she did to him. She reminded him that behind the name, the fortune, the formality, there was a man who could love, make mistakes, feel. And now, without her, he was just a title again, an image. But even realizing all this, he didn't move. He didn't say what needed to be said. It was as if he believed she would always be there, that all he had to do was continue with those silent promises, those timid gestures, and everything would remain the same. But she had already understood that he wanted her as someone he turned to in the shadows, but never in the sun. Understood that her love was strong, but that it couldn't hold up a glass castle on its own. And so, she fell silent. Silently. Painfully. And each silence was louder than any words he could have said. And he listened to that silence every day and still did nothing. Still lost and without realizing that the end had already begun. The family dinner was scheduled in advance. She knew what it meant. The table was set with silverware, glasses lined up, the right wine, linen napkins. She took care of everything as she always did, even though her heart was no longer in it. She just followed. The instructions, the gestures, the routine. It was like an automatic body inside a house that didn't see her. But that night there was something different. The tension in the air, the heavier looks, and the presence of a guest. The girl in the photo his mother had been showing off for months. The daughter of someone important, impeccable posture, high-pitched voice, high-pitched laugh. She watched from afar, from the kitchen. She watched the way he smiled in public, a practiced, trained smile that hurt her more than any scream. He seemed like a different person, more erect, colder. When her mother asked her to serve the main course, she went into the living room with a clean apron, her hair tied back, her hands steady. But as soon as she entered, silence fell. The girl said something quietly, almost like a joke. His mother laughed out loud and replied loud enough for everyone to hear, "These days maids think they're part of the house. They forget their place." The fork slipped from her hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud. No one stood up. No one helped. He looked at her, but that was all. A look. A second. Then he looked away. He pretended not to hear. He pretended not to recognize her. And that moment was the end. She bent down, calmly picked up the fork, cleaned the silver with the cloth, straightened her posture and left the room without saying anything. But inside her something broke, like a mirror that cracks without breaking. No one saw the cut. But it was there. That night, she cried alone in the back room. Her hands shook, not because of the humiliation, but because of his reaction, because he had the chance to defend her, to say a single word, to stand up. But he chose silence. The same silence that had kept her hidden for so long now turned into abandonment. It was as if their love had been erased in public with a single sentence, as if it had never existed. And he knew she was broken, but he didn't go after her. He stayed with his family. He kept smiling. He kept pretending, maybe out of fear, maybe out of cowardice. But she couldn't stand being the secret of a man who, when he had the chance to show her that he mattered, preferred the comfort of omission. That night, she didn't sleep. She just stared at the ceiling for hours. And silently, without telling anyone, she decided it was time to go. She continued working as if nothing had happened. Same posture, same punctuality, same attention to detail. But everything was different. Her gestures no longer came from the heart, but from habit. What had once been affection was now dismissal. She began to observe the house with the eyes of someone who was seeing everything for the last time. The banister on the stairs, the tiles in the kitchen, the sound of the gate when it opened at 7 in the morning. Everything seemed charged with a goodbye that only she knew was about to happen. In the hallways, she would pass him and look away, not out of anger, but because she finally did. She no longer expected him to say anything. She no longer wanted promises. He noticed her silence, but he preferred to believe it was just a phase, that she would smile again, wait again, love again, even if she was ignored. He didn't realize that she had stopped trying, that the love she felt still existed, but now it was love for herself. And that was new. And it was liberating. That week, she organized her belongings carefully. She didn't have much. A small suitcase, some clothes, a recipe book, childhood photos, and an old necklace she had inherited from her grandmother. She didn't need anything else. She didn't want memories of that time. What she needed, she already carried inside her. The certainty that she had tried until the end, and that now, out of self-love, he was leaving. She wrote the note in the early hours of the morning in the dim light of the kitchen. The words came as a calm whisper. "I'm tired of being a secret. Goodbye." She folded the paper, placed it on the dish towel, and stood there for a few minutes, looking around. He walked down the hallway with light steps. She touched the handle of the back door gently. She didn't want to make a sound. She didn't want anyone to see her. This exit wasn't an escape. It was a release. The sky was still dark when she walked through the gate. She could feel the cold wind on her face, but there was no pain, there was peace. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something for herself. Not out of love, not out of hope, but out of self-respect. When the bus arrived, she got on without looking back. She carried a small suitcase in her hands, and in her heart a world he had never dared to see. She sat by the window and watched the city wake up. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just took a deep breath, and she moved on. In the house, everything seemed the same, but it wasn't. Breakfast wasn't served. The flowers on the table were wilted. And the note was there, waiting to be read by those who didn't know how to listen to the silences. The next morning began like any other, or almost. The house was silent, the sun had barely penetrated the windows, and he, distracted, went down to the kitchen with his cell phone in his hand. He expected to smell the coffee, but there was only cold air and the sound of nothing. The kettle didn't whistle, the dishes weren't set, the flowers on the table were wilted. At first, he thought it was strange. He thought she was late. But when he saw the dishcloth folded differently, he knew, even before he saw. The note he knew. His fingertips touched the paper as if it were too fragile. He opened it slowly. He read it once, then again. "I'm tired of being a secret. Goodbye." 5 words, no signature. And yet, it was as if she were there, saying each syllable with her eyes steady. He stood still, holding the note as if it could stop time from passing. But time didn't stop. Not when she was gone. Not when all that was left was emptiness. He ran up the stairs. He called out to her in the hallway. He knocked on the service room door. No one answered. He opened the closet. It was clean. The drawer with the dish towels, empty. The soft perfume that used to linger in the air was gone. He ran to the garden as if he might find her there, picking flowers as she sometimes did. But nothing. No sign of her. No clue. Just absence. He grabbed the car keys. He left without saying a word. He crossed streets, drove without thinking. He stopped in front of the house where he knew she lived. He rang the doorbell once, then twice. A neighbor appeared at the window and said she had left early, with a small suitcase, and she seemed light, like she knew where she was going. He asked if she had said anything. The man just shook his head. She smiled, but she didn't say where. He returned to the car with trembling hands. He sat down. He took a deep breath, and it was there, in the muffled silence of the car, that he understood what he had done. He hadn't lost her. He had pushed her away, slowly, every day, with every silence, every absence, every time he chose fear, and now he didn't know where to find her, or if he wanted to, because the hardest part wasn't that she had gone. It was that she didn't want to be found anymore. In the following days, he tried everything. He called people from her past. He searched through records, social media. Nothing. It was as if she had disappeared. But it wasn't disappearance. It was a choice. She had chosen to no longer be the echo of a hidden love. She had chosen anonymity over pain, and he stayed. He was left with the note folded between the pages of a book, with the cold coffees he made alone, with the memory of the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, with the guilt, and with the certainty that now, even if he found her, she wouldn't come back. Time didn't warn him that it would continue. It just kept going. The house became quieter. His mother started to get sick. His father lost strength in his hands. His brothers moved to another city. Sunday lunches became rare. And he remained there in the same place, in the same room, with the same windows open, but without her. The kitchen became a sacred and forbidden space. For weeks, he didn't allow anyone to touch anything. Her cups remained in the cupboard. The dried flour inside the glass bottle was still on the corner of the counter. It was as if somehow he was still waiting for her to return. But he didn't come back. The new employee was hired months later. She was efficient, but discreet. She never went into the kitchen without asking first. She never touched the drawers that belonged to the other. Not because anyone had told her, but because she felt it. The house held an absent presence, a pain that echoed in the walls. He rarely had coffee at home. He spent his mornings in silence. He ate in restaurants, in offices, in hotels. Anywhere but here. He avoided the smells, the memories. But what he avoided was himself. The note was saved the same. Weak she left, carefully folded, no erasures. Inside a hardcover book with yellowed pages that she herself had once cleaned. She put it on the high shelf in the office she almost never used, but I always knew where it was. Sometimes at night I would go in there. I would pick up the book. I would touch the paper, but I wouldn't read it. I didn't need to. I already knew every word, every curve of the handwriting, every absence that those 5 sentences carried. Time did not heal. It only numbed. He tried to convince himself that everything was okay, that it was better this way, that maybe she was happy somewhere else, that he had done what was expected. But deep down, he knew. He knew that the happiness he could have had gone with her, that the only place where he felt whole was in that kitchen where she could see him, where she knew how much sugar to add without him asking, where she looked at him without fear. And now, all of that was just a memory. There were days when he would find himself staring down the hallway, waiting to hear her footsteps. Other days he would dream of the smell of coffee once again filling the house. But when he woke up, there was only silence, and the silence hurt more than the sound of loss. Because the silence was every day. It was permanent. He kept on living, wearing nice suits, attending meetings, answering messages. But inside, something had frozen. Not out of anger, nor out of outrageous regret, but out of longing for what he never had the courage to keep, and that no one saw, but he felt it every day. As the months went by, the attempts to fill in the gaps came like someone trying to tape together broken glass. He started going out more. He accepted invitations that he had previously refused. He saw old friends, met up with ex-girlfriends, went to dinners, parties, resorts and trips. Not because he wanted to, but because of pressure. Everyone said it was time to move on, that he needed someone in his element, that the pain would go away, that time would heal, and he, even though he didn't believe in any of it, let himself go. The first woman he tried to start over with was beautiful, articulate and cultured. She knew how to talk to his parents. She knew the right wine for each dish. She knew how to smile in public, but she didn't know that he liked to stir his spoon before drinking coffee. She didn't know that he hated strong perfume. And above all, she didn't look at him like someone who really saw him. She only saw what he represented, never what he was hiding. He tried sincerely, but the kiss tasted like absence, and the hug left a cold feeling where there had been warmth. Others came, each with their own promise, their own style, their own charms, but none of them entered the kitchen without looking out of place. None of them knew that he woke up in silence and hated questions early in the morning. None of them asked about the book on the shelf that was never touched, because none of them knew that inside that book was a note with 5 words that hurt more than any spoken goodbye. He started to get tired. The attempts became routine, routine became acceptance, and acceptance became cynicism. He started to pretend to have fun, pretend to be fine, pretend he didn't think about her every time a woman said good morning in a rehearsed way. It wasn't just longing, it was absence. Because longing is for something that was. Absence is for something that never stopped being. Sometimes he would lie next to someone and, in the middle of the night, he would feel like calling out to her, not with her name, but with her gesture, with the touch she knew how to offer without asking permission. But she wasn't there, and he knew she never would be again. Little by little, the emptiness stopped being a sharp pain. It became something deeper, like a dark room that you learn to walk through in silence. Her absence became part of the house, of the body, of the life. It was in the way he closed the kitchen door without looking, in the way he avoided coffee made by other hands, in the tiredness that came on Sunday mornings. People thought he had gotten over it. After all, he was surrounded by women, traveling, smiling, but inside he was a broken man, who had never loved properly, who had true love in his hands and let it slip through his fingers. And that, not even time could undo. The city continued on as if nothing had happened. Cars hurried by, people crossed the sidewalks without looking at each other, and he just walked. It had been a while since he had walked anywhere, but that Sunday something had gotten him out of bed early. He needed air, space, silence outside the house. The morning was cloudy but cool, the kind of weather she liked. Tea day, she would say, when the sky looked like that. And just that memory made his chest tighten. He walked past the square near the station. A commonplace, almost always full. He was distracted, with his eyes downcast, when a figure crossed the street in front of him. She was wearing a light coat, her hair tied in a simple bun. Her walk was calm, almost floating. His heart raced. He stopped without thinking. His hands sweated. The world seemed to slow down. There was something in the way she looked to the side, in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It was her. It had to be her. He quickened his pace. He called out, without saying her name, just a muffled, young lady. The woman turned around, and it wasn't her. She was similar, yes, her features, her gestures, even her way of walking. But her eyes were different. They didn't have that silence that spoke louder than words. He stopped. He apologized with a tired smile. She smiled back, politely, and kept walking, as if nothing had happened. But something inside him had happened. The penny finally dropped. She wouldn't be coming back. And worse, he would never see her again. He stood there for a few minutes. The noise of the city returned to normal. His body felt heavy. His heart felt heavy. It was as if the whole world had dealt him a small blow, not violent, but precise. The kind that leaves no visible scars, but changes everything inside. That unknown woman, without knowing it, had been the last door, the last imaginary chance. And now, even that was gone. He walked home slowly. He dragged his feet up the stairs. He went into the office. He picked up the book where the note was. But he didn't open it. He just held it. He held it in his lap as if that was all that was left. Because it was. There was no more searching. There were no more trying. There were no more chances. What there was absence. And the certainty that we lose some people in such a definitive way that not even time dares to bring them back. That day, he understood that her silence was a choice, and that it wasn't punishment. It was freedom. The freedom of someone who no longer accepts being someone else's backdrop. The freedom of someone who loves with dignity, and who, when she is not loved in the same way, leaves without making a sound, but leaving a void that no sound in the world can fill. The mansion was older. The walls had discreet cracks. The curtains were no longer changed as often, and the air seemed more still. His mother had left years before. His father, too. His brothers went on with their lives far away. And he stayed. Not out of attachment, but because the silence of... The house was the only place where he could continue to pretend he still felt something. Breakfast was no longer served with pomp. The smell of cake never appeared again. The kitchen, although clean, seemed abandoned, as if no one really lived there. It was on a random Tuesday, neither sunny nor rainy, that she arrived. Young, discreet, a common name, a polite smile, simple clothes. The new employee recommended by an agency. He barely noticed her. He just nodded when she was introduced. He went upstairs, as he always did. But that afternoon, when he went down to get a book from the library, he saw her. She was in the kitchen with her back turned, cleaning the sink with calm movements, her hair tied in a low bun, and something in that moment made time stand still. She turned slowly, as if she sensed his gaze. Her eyes met his, and in that exact second, he lost his footing. Because her gaze was not the same as the others, but it was not different either. There was a silent purity there, a kind of strength that could not be explained. The way she observed him, without submission, without haste, without any intention of pleasing, just looking, as if she were looking at the man and not his name, exactly as the other did. She asked if he needed anything. Her voice was soft. He said no. He stood there for longer than he should have. When he realized it, he smiled for the first time in years. A sad smile. Of someone who recognizes what they have lost. Of someone who sees an echo of the past before their very eyes. It wasn't her, but it carried something of her, a living memory in flesh and blood, and that was more than he deserved. In the following days, he avoided her, not out of disdain, but out of respect, as if he were afraid of contaminating that clean gaze with the dirt of what he had not had the courage to experience. He watched from afar, the way she walked, how she arranged the flour on the counter, how she served the tea without rushing. She was different from the woman who had left, but there was the same dignified silence in her, the same gentle strength, the same presence that did not ask for space, but filled everything. One night he went down to the kitchen. She was finishing putting away the dishes. He stood in the doorway watching. When she turned around, he said nothing. He just walked over to the table, sat down, and waited. She understood. She made coffee. She poured it, and then she stood there on the other side, without saying a word. He raised the cup to his lips. The coffee was strong, bitter, with a hint of sweetness, just like she made it. He didn't ask how she knew. She didn't ask why he cried in silence, but they both knew. In that kitchen, in that moment, the past came back not to be fixed, but to be understood. Life doesn't give back what was lost, but sometimes it offers mirrors, and in that mirror, he saw himself. He saw what he was, what he didn't have the courage to be, and he understood. That love doesn't die. It changes form. It comes back as a lesson, as presence, as karma. The young woman finished cleaning. She said good night, and left. He stood there, alone, with the cup in his hands, her note still tucked away in the book on the shelf. But now for the first time he didn't feel guilty. He felt gratitude, because even though he didn't deserve it, life gave him one last look, one last echo, one last coffee served with soul. And that coffee, he would never forget it. Iriko. This story touched your heart in any way. Watch this video right now. It helps us continue to bring you stories about love, silence, and choices that change everything. Write in the comments, "The love that hides, one day will go away." I will be reading each one. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the bell, because here the stories do not end at the end. They continue within you. And now, watch the video that's appearing on your screen. It carries an emotion as deep as this one, and perhaps an answer you didn't even know you needed to hear. See you there.